Hello, Governor. How are you today?
I'm hanging in there. How you doing?
Good, good, good. We appreciate everything that you're doing. I know it's a tough job, but you're the woman for it.
Well, I
We appreciate it.
appreciate that. I appreciate if I had a legislature that would work to help on this, but we're going to do
Oh,
everything we can, right?
absolutely. I totally understand that. And as a matter of fact, speaking of the legislature, I'll just jump down to one of these questions I had on it. That it seems like there's pandemic politics at play here with them. They continue to push against the public health mandates. It's really disappointing. And under the previous Republican leadership, the state was what I call a penny wise and a pound foolish when it came to Flint, for example. How has that calculus changed under your leadership in managing the value of life versus the value of our economy?
Well, right now we see a debate in our country about the economy versus healthcare. And you know what? It's the wrong debate. We should be focusing on the healthcare crisis and making sure that we fix it, because nothing will be more detrimental for our economy if we don't get our hands around the havoc that COVID-19 has wreaked on our state. The fact of the matter is, the legislature has routinely, prolonged states of emergency. And when in the middle of this global pandemic, where we've lost more people to COVID-19 than we did in the whole Vietnam conflict, the fact that they're not extending willing to extend the state of emergency is just amazing to me. It's really foolish and irresponsible. And frankly, it doesn't change the fact that we remain in a state of emergency. We do. We're going to continue to follow the science and the data and the public health expertise and make decisions based on saving people's lives first and foremost, because the economy will never get back to the strength that it needs to be if we don't get this public health crisis right.
Oh, yes, absolutely. On April 9th, you had announced the creation of the Racial Disparities Task Force. And then on the 20th, you really kicked it off. And yet the number of Black folks dying remains at around 40% of those infected, although we make up 40% of the state's population. I noticed that you guys have engaged in a pretty aggressive effort to conduct targeted marketing, advertising, and outreach in the last few weeks. What will it take to drive down that number, and what's your best guess as to when we can start to see that decline as part of the overall decline that we're experiencing, with the outbreak?
Well, I'll acknowledge first, one of the things that we did early on that, other states haven't followed suit is release the racial data inherent in the testing. Early on, it was hard to have a lot of confidence in what those numbers were because those questions weren't being asked in the onset of the crisis. But we've made sure that we have been transparent about that. And I think our friends in Illinois and Louisiana have done so as well. We really need to demand that we've got this information as a country, because I think it's held up a mirror to the inherent inequities that have been built into our healthcare system, built into our communities, built into our education system. I mean, this is the reality. You may remember that in my State of the State, I focused a good portion of it on mothers and babies, knowing that we've got a real disparate impact for women of color in this state. It's 3 times more deadly to be an African-American mom giving birth than it is to be a Caucasian mom giving birth. That is unacceptable, and that's why tackling it through implicit bias training, tackling it through expanding opportunity through healthcare, these are 2 ways that we can start to meet that. But I think right now in this moment, it deserves a lot more understanding and investigation and being an inclusive way of promoting ways to start to address this. And that's why we created the task force on racial disparities that is being chaired by the Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist.
Absolutely. Given the hard hit taken by the African American community due to the virus, what kind of impact do you believe it is having on Black businesses around the state?
Well, there's no question that, we are suffering in a lot of ways right now. First and foremost, the saddest way is that there are a lot of people who are mourning the loss of their loved ones. And if you're in that in that group of people that I just described, you can't even mourn the way that you're used to by being surrounded by loved ones and supported physically, emotionally, spiritually. This is, a huge challenge in COVID-19 where it's so highly communicable. And yet we know that business owners who have had historic barriers to access to capital are really going to be struggling incredibly hard in this moment as well. And that's why I've gone forward and promulgated executive orders to prevent eviction or foreclosure, with creating opportunities for people to get additional unemployment in this moment. I lengthened it and I cut some of the red tape so that people don't have to get documentation that they used to be required to. We're going to have a really strategic, I think, plan to reach out to support Black business owners on the other side of the crisis.
Hmm. Hmm. Have you been personally impacted by the virus's impact on the Black community? Have you lost any friends or relatives? Just curious. I haven't heard you talk about it except for your girlfriend who has MS.
Yeah, no, I have. And, I was talking with Garland too. I live in Lansing. I'm from the west side of the state, and we know how uniquely hard Southeast Michigan's been hit. And then Garland was talking that and this was a week ago, so I don't know if it's up to date, but he lost 15 people. I've lost a number of friends, a number of people that I got to know during the campaign. My friend Tom Wilson, who recently passed, Isaac Robinson, who lost his battle. Obviously, is not a man of color, but I think was emblematic of so many hardworking people in the city of Detroit who are trying to give back to a community, who are public servants at heart. And I think that there's just been, I've got a friend right now on a ventilator in a Detroit
Oh,
hospital.
oh my
Um,
goodness.
and he was someone that I served with in the legislature, and he's in my prayers, and I keep checking in, and he's been in bad shape for quite a while, and very worried about him.
Are you concerned at all that this push-pull between, public health and people trying to push the businesses open faster can be clouded by racial stereotypes? Or do you think people are seeing this as, Detroit versus everybody else thing? It's a Detroit problem?
The vast majority of people in our state have done the right thing. They've taken this seriously. They've gotten themselves educated about it. They've stayed home to prevent the spread. I do
Hmm.
get a little concerned when, with some of the nature of the suggestions that are coming out of members of the legislature about, well, that's a problem in that part of the state, not up here. And I get a little concerned that there's some of that feeding into it. They've
Hmm.
not said it bluntly. I can't say definitively that that's the case. We do have different regional challenges with COVID-19. And I think one that I'm always quick to point out is, if COVID-19 starts to grow its presence in a more rural northern part of our state, the
Hmm.
hospital system could get overwhelmed a lot faster than what we've seen in other urban parts of our state. And I think that's why we can't
Hmm.
just assume that because one part of the state hasn't had as dramatic of an impact, that they can't be similarly impacted if it starts to grow there. And that's why we all need to do our part.
For sure, you're right about that. The federal government has noted that foreign actors successfully worked to influence our elections in 2016. I've talked to some folks at Wayne State University and in Washington, D.C., who say that Michigan is definitely 100% on the map to be interfered with. I'm curious, are you looking at how folks might be trying to amplify anti-government messages or manipulate disinformation, particularly as it relates to Black folks and the COVID-19 crisis?
Yeah, we are. And of course, we're concerned about cybersecurity, working with the Secretary of State and the Department of Management and Budget, as well as the state police, to make sure that we are following all threats to the sanctity of our elections. It's really important, too, that efforts to postpone or put off elections don't gain traction. We went through a presidential election during the midst of the Civil War.
Mhm,
We can
mhm.
have an election in the midst of this, but we've got to have all of the protections to make sure that it is a true election, that everyone's vote is counted, and that there is not foreign interference in that election.
Hey, Greg, it's
As it
Bobby.
re-
We probably have about 30 seconds left.
okay, as it relates to disinformation around COVID-19, are you folks looking to see whether or not, folks are amplifying that? I've heard people say, you need to be outside to get immune to the disease and just all kinds of crazy stuff. And this just started appearing.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the issues that has really contributed to anxiety and continued spread is the
Mhm,
misinformation that's out there, and the lack of consistent, accurate information coming from the federal government, frankly, fed into people's, um, you know, um, lack of confidence that of what anything's being shared, because it's
mhm,
changed so much, and it's been opinion as opposed to fact, and it's been um, different one day from the next. And what people want and need is accurate, consistent information so that they can be protected. We were told that this disease doesn't impact kids, and then the story of Skylar Herbert, who's 5 years old, Detroiter, who COVID-19 presented as meningitis. You know,
mhm.
none of us, it is incumbent on every one of us to make sure that we have got accurate sources that we are getting our information from. Because COVID-19 can come home with a family member and they don't even know they brought it in. And
Mhm, mhm.
it could present as maybe a fever in one person and it could be fatal for another. We've got to make sure that every one of us takes it upon ourselves to ensure that we've got accurate, good information so we can make decisions, because there's so much misinformation out there.
Thank you so much.
All right.
I really
Thanks, Greg.
appreciate you taking out the time.
Absolutely. Take care of yourself.
You too. Keep up the good fight.